Headlights washed the service road in a flat, white beam, and everything outside that beam looked like it had been erased. The patrol truck sat crooked across the gravel as if someone had parked in a hurry, then forgotten why they were there, and the driver's door hung open wide enough to catch the wind. Even before I got close, I could see the interior light glowing and the pale square of a folded map on the seat, the kind of small detail that makes your stomach tighten because it's too ordinary to belong to something serious.
This was Yellowstone, and not the postcard part. This was the staff-only backside of the park in 2019, where service spurs branched off the loop and vanished into timber, and where a simple mistake could trap you with no cell signal, no witnesses, and no quick way out. I was 34 at the time, seasonal maintenance out of Canyon Village, and I'd been in the park long enough to know the difference between weird and wrong. A patrol unit abandoned with the lights on wasn't weird, it was wrong.
My day had started like any other, with bad coffee and a half-awake walk past the employee dining hall while the sky was still a washed-out gray. The park felt muted that early, like it was waiting for the first wave of visitors to flip a switch and make everything loud again, and the only people moving around were staff, delivery drivers, and the occasional ranger who looked like they'd been up all night. I'd been counting hours and paychecks that season, which is what you do when you're broke enough that you take work wherever it's offered, and you tell yourself you're lucky because you've got a bed and a place to park your car without getting towed. Marcy Dillard, my supervisor, caught me outside the break room at 6:10 a.m. sharp with a clipboard tucked under her arm and a face that said she'd already been handling problems for an hour. Marcy didn't do small talk before sunrise, and she didn't pad bad news with friendly words. She stood in front of me like a door and said, "Gate 11 is down again. Service road off the loop. You and Troy. Get it done before the first wave piles in." Her pen tapped the paper once, a clean, impatient sound. Then she added, "Bring a new lock. Bring wire. Bring cutters. Don't take the easy way back." I asked why, because you always ask even when you already know the answer is going to be something you don't like. Marcy's eyes lifted off the clipboard, and for a moment the tiredness in her face turned into something sharper. "We've had missing people," she said, and she said it the way someone says ice on the road, like it's a fact you can't argue with. "Law enforcement's busy. Just do your job and keep your head." Troy Haskins was already by the maintenance truck, leaning against the fender with a coffee in one hand and that permanent squint you get from years outdoors. He was older than me by at least 15 years, built like a guy who'd hauled furniture upstairs without help and never complained about it, and he had the talent of sounding annoyed even when he was calm. When I told him Gate 11, he sighed like the gate had personally insulted him. "That gate hates us," he said. I told him it hated everyone, and Troy made a small sound that might have been a laugh if he'd wanted it to be. We loaded the truck the way we always did, because routine is what keeps you from thinking too hard. Hardware box, spare hinges, bolts, washers, cordless driver with 2 batteries, smooth wire, bolt cutters, and a lock still in plastic, the brass clean enough to look out of place in a place like Yellowstone. I tossed in a small first aid kit, mostly out of habit, then checked my key ring and felt the familiar weight of it in my palm. The ring was too heavy for what it opened, and one of the tags was a flat piece of metal stamped maintenance, scratched and dull from years of bouncing off other keys. We rolled out and took the service turnoff Marcy had marked, leaving paved road for gravel and the open sky for a tunnel of lodgepole pine. The air dropped a few degrees almost immediately, and the sound changed with it. Tires crunching over rock, tools tapping in the bed, the engine humming steady while the forest swallowed everything else. Yellowstone has a way of shifting moods without warning, and on that road it felt like the park had closed around us, the way a room closes when you shut the door, quiet and private, and not interested in what you want. On the way out, we passed the corkboard near the employee dining hall, and I saw new paper tacked up in neat rows, missing posters, not a lost dog, not a wallet, people, 2 hikers from the previous week, a couple who hadn't checked out at the time they said they would, and a solo backpacker whose car had been at a trailhead for 3 days. The posters were polite, smiling photos with clean fonts and a tip line number, and that politeness bothered me, because when something is truly wrong, people try to keep it clean, like that will make it manageable. Troy noticed me looking and said, "You don't want that in your head. I told him it was already there. He shrugged and said, "That's why you keep your eyes on hinges. Hinges don't go missing." We hadn't gone far when the patrol truck appeared ahead of us, sitting sideways across the service road like it had been abandoned mid-thought. Headlights on, light bar off, driver's door open. Troy slowed and parked behind it, leaving room to back out, and even before he put our truck in park, he said, "That's not normal." I got out and walked up slow, not because I thought I was brave, but because my brain was counting details, and counting makes fear behave. The patrol unit was still warm, and I could feel the heat in the air near the hood. The seat held a folded map and a half-eaten sandwich, the bread drying at the edges. The radio handset sat neatly in its cradle, which struck me harder than the open door, because if you ditch a truck in a hurry, you don't take time to tidy the radio. The keys were not in the ignition. I leaned in and looked at the dash where the unit number sticker sat, and I didn't recognize it. Different district. The map had a grease pencil line on it, rough and fast, looping off-road and back again, like someone had been tracing a search route they couldn't pin down. "Maybe he stepped out for a minute," Troy said, but he didn't sound like he believed it. I stepped back and scanned the tree line for movement, listening for a voice, a footstep, a radio chirp, anything that would explain why a law enforcement truck was sitting like a mistake. There was nothing except the ticking of our own engine cooling. "Let's call it in," I said, and I reached for my phone. A beam of light hit my chest, then my face, then dropped to my hands. "Don't," a man said from the edge of the road, and he stepped out like he'd been standing there the whole time. Ranger uniform, flat hat, duty belt, flashlight in one hand, the other hand resting loose near his belt like he had nothing to hide. He didn't rush, and he didn't act nervous. He looked like he belonged, which is the most dangerous costume a person can wear in a place like that. "You two maintenance?" he asked. Troy squared his shoulders. "Yeah," he said. "Gate call. What happened here?" The man nodded toward the trees with his flashlight still low and said, "Missing hikers. We had eyes on them near this access." Then he added, calm as a briefing, "I don't want you calling anyone. Radio traffic carries. People hear things. They run. It gets worse." His voice was steady, practiced, and the words were the kind of words you expect from someone who has repeated the same instructions 100 times. I looked at his badge when the patrol headlights caught it. It flashed gold for a second, then went dull again. Metal. "Where's the ranger who drove this?" I asked. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped closer to the open patrol truck and looked at the map like it belonged to him. "They're close," he said. "We need to move." Troy glanced at me, eyebrows raised, and the man cut right through that silent question by asking, "What are your names?" Troy said his, and I said, "Jonah," and the man nodded once like that was enough. "I'm going to need your help," he said. "There's a gate down. If it's open, anyone can drive in. If it's closed, we control this road, understand?" "We're here for the gate," Troy said. "That's the job." "Good," the man replied. "Then walk with me." He led us deeper down the service road, away from the abandoned patrol unit with its open door and drying sandwich, and walking away from that truck felt like walking away from a warning sign that had been planted for us. The man kept his flashlight low, sweeping the road edge and the gravel, not the woods. That bothered me. If you're searching for hikers, you look for color and movement and listen for a voice. You don't study the ground like you're tracking an animal. When we reached the gate, I recognized the spot immediately. A steel post, a hinged arm, a chain across the road, and enough room on either side that someone could try to squeeze around if they were determined. The chain hung slack and wrong, and the lock was gone. "See?" the ranger said. "Open access." Troy crouched, touched the chain, and pulled his hand back. "Cut," he said. "Fresh cut." I stepped closer, and the world grabbed my ankles. Thin wire, tight enough to bite through the fabric of my pants, placed low so you wouldn't see it until it was too late. I froze, because the first instinct is always to jerk back, and my second thought was the ugly truth that jerking back would only cinch it tighter. Troy swore under his breath and lifted his boot a fraction, and the wire held him too. "Hold still," the uniformed man said, like he was helping. He moved behind us, and I heard his boots on gravel, slow and deliberate. I tried to turn my head, and something hit the back of my neck hard and flat. Not a punch, more like a shove with a tool. The kind of hit that doesn't break you but makes you obey. My phone slipped from my fingers. The man caught it cleanly, no fumbling, like he'd practiced that motion. "Don't fight," he said. "It makes this messy." Troy twisted on instinct, and the wire tightened and made him grunt. "What are you doing?" he shouted. The man didn't raise his voice. "Gate first," he said, and he walked to the gate post and swung the gate shut. It moved smoothly. It latched clean. Then he locked it with a new brass lock that looked too clean for that road, and I stared at it like it was a magic trick, because I knew what it meant. The only easy way out had just been taken away. Behind the trees, another vehicle idled. I couldn't see it, but I saw the way the cold air shifted and fogged behind the branches where engine heat pushed against the morning. Someone was there, waiting, close enough to help him if he needed help, or close enough to make sure this ended the way he wanted. The uniformed man came back and said, "Now we're going to do this simple," and he crouched and cut the wire at Troy's ankle first, then mine, using compact cutters off his belt like they belonged there. That was another detail that hit me wrong. He moved like a person who had done this before, not like a ranger improvising. I rubbed my ankle and tried to keep my face neutral while my brain ran in tight circles. Troy didn't bother pretending. He stepped forward and said, "Give him back his phone." The man looked at Troy for a moment, like he was making a decision, then swung his flashlight up and jammed it into Troy's face. Troy flinched and brought a hand up. The man drove his shoulder into Troy's chest and shoved him back toward the ditch, hard enough that Troy's heel slipped and he went down on his hip with a sharp breath. Then the man drew a pistol and pointed it at me, not Troy, as if Troy had already been handled. "Walk," he said to me, "to the shed. Slow." There was a small maintenance shed farther down the spur, the kind that held road salt, spare signs, cones, and stakes. I knew it, and my hands went cold because I understood what he wanted: privacy. "He's hurt," I said, because it was the only sentence my mouth could form. "He's fine," the man replied, without looking at Troy. Troy pushed himself up, breathing in short bursts, his face flushed with pain and anger. "You can't do this," he said. "You hear me? You can't." The uniformed man didn't answer. He kept the pistol steady on me and started walking, and I walked because I could feel the weight of the gun even without a sound. Troy followed a few steps behind, limping slightly, and I could almost hear him deciding whether to rush the man. I wanted to tell him not to. I wanted to tell him to live. My mouth wouldn't work, and by the time the thought became clear, we were already at the shed. The man unlocked it with a key that was not supposed to exist. That frightened me more than the pistol. Pistols can be stolen. Keys like that mean access, time, and planning. Inside, the shed smelled like old wood, dust, and cold metal, and the shelves were stacked with paint cans, buckets, broken stakes, and cones that had been sun-faded to a dull orange. The man stepped in, turned to face us, and said, "Hands on the wall." I put my hands up and spread my fingers on plywood. Troy hesitated, and the man shifted the pistol toward him. Troy raised his hand slowly and said, voice shaking with fury, "You think you're a ranger? You're not." The uniformed man made a small sound, like Troy had said something boring, and then he fired once. It wasn't loud the way movies make it. It was sharp, contained, final. Troy's body jerked, and he dropped to his knees with his hands still up like he was trying to explain himself. He looked at me one time, his mouth opening as if he wanted to say my name or tell me something important, but no words came out. Then he tipped onto his side and stopped moving. My stomach flipped hard, and my legs tried to quit. The shed went quiet except for my breathing and the faint hum of the world outside, and I remember thinking, absurdly, that I could still smell paint and dust like it was any other workday. The man stepped closer and said, "Turn around, slow." I turned because I didn't know what else to do. He held my phone in his left hand like a prize. "Your supervisor sent you," he said. "I needed that gate controlled. You two were convenient." I stared at Troy on the floor, not letting my eyes stay on him for long because if I did, I knew I would freeze and that would be the end of me. "You killed him," I said, and my voice sounded thin and wrong. "I can't have witnesses," the man replied, like he was explaining a simple policy. He grabbed my wrist and pulled me toward a metal chair in the corner, and as he did, I saw the shelf behind him and the thing that changed the shape of the fear in my chest. A stack of laminated cards, employee badges, contractor passes, clip-on holders, lanyards, dozens of them, arranged like someone's collection. And on top, I saw my own face, the same gray hoodie I was wearing that morning, the same tired expression, the photo taken in the dorm hallway, close enough to catch the scuff on the wall by the laundry room. My throat tightened. He followed my eyes and smiled, just a little. "Stay still," he said, and he reached into a plastic bin. "Zip ties." His pistol dipped for a fraction of a second as his attention shifted, and that fraction was the only opening I got. I kicked the metal chair toward his legs. It clipped his shin and knocked him off balance enough to make his shoulder turn. I lunged past him, keeping my head down, and my shoulder hit the door frame hard enough that pain flashed white. I ran out into the road with the sound of his boots hitting gravel behind me, fast and angry now, the calm voice gone. I sprinted toward the gate because it was the only clear line in my head, and I hit the locked brass with both hands like I could rip it off through force. He was behind me, pistol up, and I knew if I stayed in the open, I was finished. I threw myself off the road into the brush and rolled down a short slope, pine needles and dirt and broken sticks scraping my arms. I got up bent low and ran, using trees to break lines, keeping my body behind trunks, moving like the forest could hide me if I asked it right. I didn't know where the second vehicle was. I didn't know if someone else was watching, waiting for me to run into them. I only knew the park had turned into a closed room, and the door had just been locked behind me. I aimed for the main road because visitors meant witnesses, and witnesses meant he couldn't take his time. My lungs burned and my legs felt heavy, and when I paused in a shallow ditch to listen, I saw him above me on the service road, moving careful again, not rushing, scanning the ground like he was tracking an animal. Except he wasn't tracking for survival. He was tracking because he wanted to finish what he started. Through gaps in the trees, I saw the main road, a strip of asphalt that looked unreal after all that gravel and pine. A van passed, then nothing. I waited until the road was clear and ran, bursting out at the shoulder and waving both arms like a person who has no dignity left to protect. A sedan slowed, and the driver, a woman with 2 kids in the back, stared at me like I was a problem she hadn't planned for. "Help," I said, leaning toward her window. "Call 911. There's a man with a gun. He killed my coworker." Her eyes went wide, and her hands shook as she fumbled for her phone. Then a second vehicle rolled up behind her, slow and controlled, and my blood turned cold again. A dark sport utility vehicle, dusty, with a park sticker on the bumper that looked almost right. The woman froze, as if the presence of an official-looking vehicle made her unsure of which emergency she was supposed to believe. The uniformed man stepped out of the sport utility vehicle calm as ever, hat low, hands open, the pistol hidden but implied. He walked toward us like this was a routine misunderstanding. "Ma'am," he said, steady voice, "step back. This man assaulted a ranger." The words were clean, professional, and perfectly shaped for a stranger's ears. "He's lying," I said. "He shot my coworker. He took my phone. He has my badge." The man didn't change expression. "Sir," he said to me, "sit down on the ground. Now." He made it sound like a safety procedure, something you do for everyone's benefit, and I could see the woman's mind trying to choose the easier story, the one where the uniform is real and the man without a phone is unstable. I forced myself to breathe slow enough to speak clearly. "Ask him his name," I said to the woman. "Ask him what district he's out of. Ask him the unit number of the patrol truck back there." The uniformed man took one more step and his hand drifted toward his belt. I backed away, keeping the sedan between us, and then more cars appeared around the bend, a white pickup followed by another vehicle, and I saw something flicker across the uniformed man's face for the first time. Calculation. In that half-second, I noticed a detail I'd missed earlier. His badge was clipped wrong, too high, slightly off-center. Real law enforcement rangers clip it the same way every day without thinking. Their bodies remember. His didn't. Then a real law enforcement vehicle came up fast from the opposite direction, lights on, braking hard enough that the front dipped. A real ranger stepped out wearing body armor and sunglasses, no hat. face set hard in a way that told me he already suspected what he was seeing. "Hands!" the real ranger shouted, and the uniformed man froze, caught between two versions of authority. "That's him," I said, pointing with both hands like pointing could pin him to the asphalt. "That's him." The uniformed man moved anyway, not toward the ranger, but toward his sport utility vehicle, and the real ranger advanced with his pistol up. "Stop!" he shouted. The uniformed man swung his arm, trying to bring his pistol up. The real ranger fired once. The uniformed man stumbled, hit his own door, and slid down to the ground. His pistol skidded across the road in a dull clatter, and the world went still for a beat, as if everyone needed a second to accept what had just happened. The woman in the sedan started sobbing, and one of the kids screamed. The real ranger kept his weapon up, spoke into his shoulder radio in a tight voice, and within moments, other law enforcement rangers arrived like they'd been close and already moving. One of them grabbed me by the elbow and pulled me back to the shoulder. "Where's the victim?" he asked. "The shed," I said. "Service Road, Gate 11. He locked the gate. There's a patrol truck with its lights on. The ranger who drove it is gone." They moved with the clean speed of professionals, clearing the sport utility vehicle, controlling bystanders, watching the tree line, and keeping me in place without treating me like I was the problem. A ranger crouched in front of me and said, "I'm Heller, look at me. Slow down and tell me what happened." I told him, keeping it simple because my mind couldn't carry anything complicated. Gate call, patrol truck, man in uniform, wire at our ankles, phone taken, shed, Troy shot, my badge on a shelf. Heller's face tightened when I said, "Badge." "He had your badge?" he asked. "He had a stack," I said, "and mine had a photo from this morning in the dorm hallway." Heller stared at me like he'd misheard, then he stood up abruptly and walked away without another word, not because he didn't believe me, but because he did, and he didn't want his face near mine when he processed it. They brought me back down the service road in a tight group, rifles out, eyes scanning, and the patrol truck was still there with its door open, sandwich still drying, map still on the seat. The scene looked unchanged, which made it feel even worse, like the park didn't care what had happened. Farther down, the gate was locked with the clean brass lock. One ranger cut it in seconds. The shed door stood open. Troy lay where he fell. A medic checked him anyway, because that's what professionals do even when the answer is already there, and after a brief moment, the medic looked up and shook his head once. Heller stepped into the shed, and I stayed outside because my body refused to cross that threshold again, but I watched Heller's face change as his eyes hit the shelf. He came out holding a laminated badge between two fingers like it was contaminated. It wasn't mine. It belonged to a law enforcement ranger named Sam Doran. I knew the name because Sam's missing poster had been on that employee corkboard for 2 weeks, and people had been telling themselves stories about why he hadn't come back. Injured, disoriented, maybe chased by wildlife, maybe a simple accident. Nobody wanted to say the other thing. Heller stared at Sam Doran's badge like it was proof of a failure he could taste. Then the crime scene team started arriving, and the tone of everything shifted from urgent to methodical, which in a way was worse, because methodical means the worst part is confirmed, and now you're collecting pieces. They searched the sport utility vehicle and found keys, lots of them, gate keys, building keys, a master ring with tags that didn't match any current system. They found a notebook with dates and locations written neat like a work schedule. They found an envelope with my name on it, and inside was a printed copy of my employee file like someone had pulled it straight from a database. On top was that hallway photo from the morning, the one I hadn't even known existed until I saw it on the shelf. I stood near the road shoulder with scratches on my arms and dirt on my clothes, watching Heller look at the photo with his lips pressed tight, and I asked the only question my mind could hold. How did he get that? Heller didn't answer right away. He looked past me at the forest, as if the trees might offer an explanation. "We've had someone in the system," he said finally, voice low. "Or someone's been inside for a long time. They never let me close to the man again." From a distance, I saw him sitting on the ground by the road with his hands cuffed behind his back, face blank, not angry, not panicked, just empty, like he'd already accepted that this version of the day was done. Later, in a small office at Canyon Village, a ranger told me his name was Dale Sutter. Not a ranger, not an employee, just a man who had learned how to look official and move through the park like he belonged. He'd stolen keys. He'd stolen badges. He'd taken people who trusted uniforms, and he'd done it in a place that trains everyone to obey uniforms because obedience keeps visitors safe most of the time. They asked him where the missing hikers were. They asked him about Sam Doran. He told them where to find some things, and he stayed quiet about others. They found a shallow pit behind an equipment yard fence and recovered a law enforcement ranger's duty belt and radio, enough to end any polite fantasies about Sam walking out of the woods. They found 2 backpacks and the remains of a torn tent off another service spur, consistent with the missing couple from the posters, but no people, no clean closure. By sundown, they told me I could go, and the words sounded wrong, like you can't go from something like that and just return to being a person doing a job. Marcy met me outside the office, her face pale in a way I'd never seen on her. "I sent you there," she said, and her voice cracked on the sentence. "I sent you right into it." "You didn't know," I told her, because it was true, and because blaming Marcy wouldn't bring Troy back. Marcy shook her head anyway, like the truth didn't help. "They're going to ask how he knew," she said. "They're going to ask about the keys." I thought about the photo, the timing, the dorm hallway outside my room, the way he'd said my supervisor sent me, like he'd been listening, like he'd been inside our routine. That night I went back to my dorm and stared at my door lock for a long time. It looked normal. It felt normal. That was the worst part, because normal is what lets someone like that move through your life without friction. I barely slept, and when I did, I woke up to every small sound in the hallway, every footstep, every door latch, my mind trying to prove the world wasn't safe anymore. 2 days later, still inside the park, I turned in my keyring and signed a form that said I had returned all property. The ranger behind the desk held up the flat metal maintenance tag and studied it longer than he needed to. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he turned it over between his fingers. "This one isn't ours," he said.
Nah.
He flipped it over again and held it up so I could see the back. Scratched deep into the metal, hidden beneath years of scuffs and grime, was a number I had never noticed. 11.